Hi everyone. Welcome to Morbid Planet. I'm your host, Erin Chapman. Thank you for joining us tonight from home. And if you guys love vampires, we've definitely got you covered today. Tonight, we're going to dive into the world of Dracula with the great grandnephew of author Bram Stoker. And in case you've been living under a rock and you don't know the story, Dracula was published back in the day in 1897, and it's influenced the vampire genre for the last 125 years. Also, our guest took that novel a step further and published a prequel in 2021. So let's give a warm welcome to Dacre Stoker. Thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. I really appreciate it.
You're most welcome, Erin. Thank you for having me. I'm stoked, as they say. I'm sorry, I had to throw that.
No, that's okay.
Right after that, get it out of there.
I just wanted to start off a little bit, and just for like our fans, because not everyone's familiar with what you do, what Bram did, and the Bram Stoker estate, what it represents. Can you give us like a little synopsis, a little bit of background on what exactly you do?
Bram was one of 7 children. Of those 7 children, only 3 had offspring. Obviously, Bram Stoker did. So he had a son. His son had a daughter. Daughter was married twice. There are a couple of great grandsons still alive. They actually are the Bram Stoker estate. They own Bram Stoker's intellectual property. Obviously, the book is in public domain, but Bram Stoker's name, his persona, and any unpublished works are not. So if somebody wanted to attach, Bram Stoker to a product, or they want to get factual information, then they come to me, because I help, along with my wife, help my cousins in England manage this estate. Occasionally we have licensing deals. Some of Bram's books, even though they're public domain, certain production companies would like to turn some of these things into movies. I can't give you the names right now.
That's
but
okay.
There's an interesting one that's not Dracula that is being looked at. But so they recognize the importance of the name Bram Stoker being connected to Dracula and to his writing, which makes me feel really good, Erin, because, you asked, what have I been doing? Even though I've written a couple of fictional books and nonfiction, my whole motivation is to help the horror world learn more about who Bram Stoker was, what his inspirations were, his research process, his writing process, and get to know Bram as a man, a person himself, rather than just that person that wrote Dracula. So that's sort of the idea of managing the Stoker estate. I do a ton of research, which my wife helps me on. We put on the bramstokerestate.org, which is sort of like a clearinghouse to let people learn about Bram, free of charge. What we put out there is what other researchers let us put out there. So, we're just trying to be a clearinghouse and again, elevate the name Bram Stoker in the world, so he can sort of catch up to his creation. It's almost like the creation is greater than the creator. We're trying to even those odds a little bit.
I wanted to go way back, because like when I was looking up some stuff and thinking about questions that I wanted to ask you, I wanted to find out, what was it like growing up as a kid in a family that had this immediate connection to someone so famous as Bram Stoker? And is it something that was talked about, like a kind of thing, or was it, oh, hey, you're a relative and this is back in the day? Or when you were growing up, were you aware of Bram and his influence on the vampire genre at an early age, or was this later in life?
Okay, so I grew up in Montreal, Canada, and you've seen the Addams Family and the Munsters, right?
Yes.
We
One
were
of my
nothing
favorites.
like that. Mine too, but we were nothing like. We were so ordinary and dull and non-horrific. Our family was into horses and very outdoorsy type stuff. And funnily enough, we really didn't know very much until I was in my teens and when I went off to college about the actual impact of Bram. And you've got to look at it this way. We're talking now the 70s, all right? In the 70s, McNally and Florescu wrote In Search of Dracula. That was really sort of groundbreaking research for the common man. Not, the scholars maybe have had a leg up on those 2 writers from professors from Boston College, but that kind of made its way out into mainstream. That educated, me and my family. And then there was Dr. Elizabeth Miller, sort of about 10 years later, who contacted family members in Montreal and said, look, I'm here in Toronto, I'm doing this research. Did you know this? So we were lucky that people like Elizabeth Miller and McNally and Florescu had an interest and obviously reached out to us. And
Yeah.
one of my uncles was invited to New York to watch one of the Dracula productions with Frank Langella on stage. It's almost like we were being treated like Dracula royalty when we really didn't know too much about it, to be honest, because we were really interested with Bram's youngest brother, my great-grandfather, George Stoker, who was the link. He was very close to Bram. He actually lived with him in London while he was doing med school. And we were more interested in some of the very cool medical advancement that Dr. George Stoker did, which was invent ozone therapy, which is pretty cool. But in a roundabout way, Halloween comes and goes and people are like knocking on the door and going, oh, the Stokers, what are you going to do? Take our blood. And, finally, I think at the age of 12 or 13, I said to my dad, what is going on? What are they talking about? And he brought me down to the library in our house, and he pulled off the bookshelf, this mustard colored book. And my God, I mean, it's like this one here, not this one, but it was an original, Erin, and it was the copy that Bram Stoker signed to his mother. And it came out 2 days before the actual release date. And then it was passed on to one of his other brothers, Richard, who, funnily enough, immigrated to Vancouver Island. He set up shop there as a doctor with his wife. He signed the book, and then his wife signed the book, and somehow it's made its way to Montreal. And
meanwhile, it's just kicking out in your library, just hanging out this whole time.
It was. And I mean, listen, a lot of the listeners will probably realize that is a very valuable book. And embarrassingly, I tried to read that book. I mean, it was difficult reading at the age of 12 or so. And I didn't finish it. I tried. It was like, this is the sentence structure. It was complicated, the dialects. So I ended up not reading it until I went off to college. And when I finally was a college student, 18, 19, I decided now is the time. Plus I was taking a course in oral interpretation of literature. And the professor said, you should really do a paper on, or an oral paper on Bram Stoker. And so that's when I really delved into it. So we came late in age, so to speak, to understand Bram, but then there was really, kind of no going back. I kept accumulating info, and then I stopped because I was really involved in my college education to become a teacher, and I was also training for the Olympic Games in the sport of modern pentathlon for Canada.
Wow!
Which I made the team in 1980, but of course there was a boycott, and then I became a coach for Canada in '88, and so horror took a back seat until I sort of, recovered from all that exciting travel around the world, moved to South Carolina with my American wife, and settled here. And sort of in the late 90s, that's when I decided, okay, it's now time to get back into really understanding the family. And this uncle that still lived in Montreal started sending me stuff. And it was things that he accumulated through the youngest brother, George. And I started going off to conferences and reading stuff. And, long story short, the first fictional book, Dracula, the Undead, the sequel, all of that just got me, rolling into it. So that's how it all came around.
Can you mentioned when you went and actually sat down and read the copy of Dracula, what were your initial thoughts after you read this book? Just because, you tried when you were younger, and then, you got into college and you just you went through it. What did you think when you finished it?
Well, I mean, it was actually the thoughts started coming during it. Like, whoa, this is really interesting. This epistolary style, and I was like frustrated. Well, I was like, oh, don't you guys understand? This is what's going on. There's a bloody vampire here, but it's going to take Mina to explain it to the other guys. So I got caught up in this, and every now and then I'd stop and say, my God, Bram, that's a really interesting. You got me. That's the writing style. You got me. And I was enthralled with figuring out, when are these people going to figure out that this is a vampire? And it's not like Van Helsing can simply tell them. He's got to, sort of manage this group to come to a consensus before they can obviously mount their attack. So during it that got me. And then, Erin, when I finished it, it wasn't like I read it over 2 or 3 days. It was probably 2 weeks.
Okay.
And I thought, my God, this is cool. This story, as I had understood, it's never been out of print, public domain. It's
Yeah.
made a huge impact around the world, and now it's impacted me, and it's written by a relative. I thought,
Yeah.
this is cool. That it's also not a Canadian thing, as you know, to sort of pound our chest and say, well, now that I've read Dracula, I'm so much better than I was, and we're a relative of the guy that wrote it. It was more of this kind of silent satisfaction that, I finally read the book and I get it, which I understand. Just let you and your listeners know, you don't get Dracula with just one reading or two or three. It takes many readings and deep dives into different things, listening to what other people have said about it to
Yeah.
begin to get it. And the more, even today, which is, 30 years later, I'm still learning about Bram Stoker and little things that either he did in his life or happened in his life to him, or things that he picked up on that he inserted into the story. So I'm still finding, and I kind of say it's
30
like an
years
onion, this book.
later. Yeah.
You're still figuring stuff out.
That's
Absolutely.
cool. And when you talked about how you decided eventually just to kind of jump feet first into the role and representing Bram's work and continuing the legacy, and what actually came about at that moment? What kind of was your aha moment that you decided at that point that you just wanted to start following through with this? And did the transition come to you easily, or was it just, a struggle, or was it natural to you? How was that whole experience?
That I don't often get asked that question, but as we say, timing is everything. I'd been a teacher, science and physical education, moved down to South Carolina. I taught and I coached. And then I was at this period where the school I was at wasn't going in a great direction. And I had a part-time job in running a land conservation organization. And so I had a block of time in my life. And I was used to being very busy, as you can imagine, as a teacher, as a coach, and then also doing a sport called modern pentathlon with 5 things. I'm always looking for challenges, and I like to challenge myself. So I wasn't scared by going into something that was not a strength. I mean, I wasn't a trained writer, but I was naturally inquisitive. I think I'm a bit of a storyteller, like many in the family, and maybe it's the Irish blood. So I wasn't scared or daunted, but I went into it eyes open, and I realized there were other good people that I met along the way. And one of the first ones was Dr. Elizabeth Miller from Toronto, who was kind of held my hand at certain times. And then some of the other biographers, Paul Murray in Ireland, I contacted early, and he was a wonderful guy and thrilled that I was getting involved. It happened also that, when I started writing Dracula the Undead with Ian Holt, that there was sort of a cast of people, a historic researcher, Alex Gallant, and the guys at the Rosenbach Museum I'd go to. All these people were sort of very helping, wanting to enlighten the Stoker guy. And I thought they got great thrills out of maybe helping Stoker understand things that they knew more than a Stoker would. And I got it. I wasn't going to be a snob about it. It was just, okay, tell me what you know. I'm a sponge here. But it's my same approach, Erin, as in sport. I might not be great at it, but by golly, I'm willing to put in the time, put in the effort, put the hours in to work it and figure it out. So it may have taken me quite a while, but writing Dracula the Undead meant multiple trips to different places, to Ireland, to Trinity College, to look in the archives, to look at the Stoker papers, getting to know my cousins in England, the great grandsons of Bram, figuring out what knowledge they have they can share with me. So all of that was just a slow process of gathering information, trusting people that they were going to lead me in the right direction. Sometimes getting burned a little bit, and sometimes just okay, that's not going anywhere.
New direction, new plan.
But that I wasn't afraid, because sport is a lot like that. You make efforts, and sometimes it doesn't go anywhere, and you get right back to it.
I guess with your journey, how this has just evolved over time, where do you see it going in the future? Do you see you're looking at kind of expanding more books, or do you just see yourself still doing more research, or?
I've already started the expansion into other areas, and that is, to try to get all these right, graphic novels. Chris Macaulay in Edmonton, an Irish guy living there, is very talented in many areas. We have done 2 graphic novels together, which is one of Bram Stoker's short stories that I don't think a lot of people really knew about, called The Squaw. For
Oh,
politically
okay.
correct reasons, we turned that into The Virgin's Embrace and had Jessica Martin be the artist, and that came out, I don't know, 6 months ago with Andrews UK.
Yeah.
Dracula's Bedlam is a series of stories that we involve John Peel writing, who is a fellow that has written many stories in the Doctor Who universe. But
Okay.
that was sort of looking at what I call some of the missing links in Dracula. And one of them is the asylum, Dr. Seward's asylum. There could be so much more
There could be.
stories
Yeah.
based on that. So Dracula's Bedlam is centered around that asylum. We're
Okay.
also getting into games.
Okay.
Chris is huge. This is sort of what he does. Besides making comics, is in games, and there are certain games, and I can only allowed to tell you so much at this point. Some of
That's
it I
okay.
even forget. But Nightfall Games is coming out with a Dracula related game
Mm-hmm.
within a few weeks.
Ooh.
There's RPG games. We're also looking down the road with some board games, dice games, and hopefully electronic games. So that's a whole area that obviously other people have done Dracula related themes with, but coming from us, which Chris and I are calling the Stoker verse, it's kind of authentic
Yes.
information based on Bram's notes, the Dracula typescript, things that were edited out, things that never made it into the story, that never even got into the typescript, so, just got stuck in notes. Some of the stuff that I discovered in Bram's research books in the London Library that never even made it into his notes, that had
Oh,
underlining and all that
cool.
stuff. What I'm trying to do is, for lack of a better term, exploit some of the cool stuff that has been kind of stagnant, that could be brought out and enjoyed by people in different mediums. And
Mm-hmm.
then, the ultimate goal that I've been working on, besides all these lectures that I give about Bram's life and his processes and researches, I think it'd be very cool to do some sort of documentary, again, to hit another medium. Lectures are great, books are great, but
Yeah.
nowadays people like to watch stuff on the computer, on their phone, on Netflix.
Yes.
I think 2 things would be very cool to be involved in. So if any of your listeners have an in, a documentary about Bram's writing process would be very cool.
Yeah.
But I also think a biopic of Bram Stoker during the time of his life while he was writing Dracula would be very cool.
Nice. Yeah, that
And
would be.
I love the movie. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but Alfred Hitchcock when he was writing Psycho. If
I
you
like
haven't
Psycho.
seen it,
Yes.
watch that movie. It's Anthony Hopkins, Helen Mirren,
Yeah.
Scarlett Johansson, but it's the time frame when he's actually doing the movie and runs into all kinds of problems emotionally, socially, with the production, with the censors. And I think it'd be very cool because we know it took Bram around 7 years from starting to his notes to publishing. And
Mm-hmm.
there's lots of other cool stuff in there to do a biopic. I don't have the skill as a screenwriter, but I could certainly be a consultant or advisor to somebody who could take my thoughts and turn them into a screenplay. So
That
that's
was
where I hope
such
to
a
go with
cool
all the
movie in
stuff.
the sense because I love Hitchcock films. And I didn't even know the film actually existed till one night. I was flicking channels on TV and I was like, what is this? Anthony Hopkins, Helen
Yeah,
Mirren. And then I started it over thanks to PVR, which is great. And then I watched it and it was amazing because, yeah, you got all the behind the scenes stuff that I'd know none of it,
that's it.
however
Yeah,
loosely based it was on, but still, it was a good
yeah.
film. Yeah.
I just love that, pull back the curtain and see
Yeah.
what's going on to things that we all love or we think we know what really went on behind the scenes. And there's a lot to Bram Stoker and Dracula and Bram's other books, as well as his brothers and sisters, are cool stuff. So I've got plenty of fodder.
Yeah.
And what I usually like to do is, connect with a co-author, because I'm not a very strong writer myself, but I got lots of great stories and
Mm-hmm.
research. somebody who can help me deliver that message.
You
So
need the person to
the
write it,
long-term
but
plans.
you got all the juicy bits. Were you a vampire fan like your whole life, or do vampires even interest you past Dracula? And if you were a fan, do you have like favorite authors, movies, or are you strictly just, you do your Dracula thing and you do your Bram Stoker thing?
Well, I sort of was. I watched Dark Shadows as a kid. That was one of my entrees. And then the first movie that I saw when I was at boarding school, I'll never forget it, out in Lennoxville, Quebec. They
Okay.
showed the Fearless Vampire Hunters, and it was like, they sat the school down and said, here's your movie on Saturday night. There's
Yeah.
nothing else you're going to do. So it's like, and then it said, in the credits, based on the movie by Bram Stoker, and like all my friends are like, noogies and everything else, give me a rough time, like, whoa, give me a break. But I thought that was pretty cool. But and it wasn't until, it's not like I didn't like it, but I was so involved in sports in
Hmm.
school that, it wasn't till college till I really got to know Bram, and then I picked up Stephen King's Salem's Lot, and I was
Okay.
like, oh, geez, that is cool. And
Yeah.
then sometime not too long, Interview with a Vampire. And so I would say, honestly, I'm not a person that knows all the movies. I try to understand them, and I look at little
Hmm.
clips, and I try, I meet people at conventions that are really into the movies. I don't spend a ton of time, but I try to watch,
Okay.
the recent stuff, the 92 Coppola, Dracula Untold. I try to watch those, and I like them, but it's not like I gravitate toward them. I still do a lot of outdoor activities in the daytime. I'm not so
Hmm.
much a night guy. So I'm probably, sort of like, I'd say vampire light, but Bram
Okay.
Stoker heavy.
Okay.
How about that? Yeah.
What do you think of like again, I don't know if you've watched them, but for instance, like the last Dracula that Netflix did with Clay Spang in it. Did you watch that?
Oh yeah,
Did you
I did.
enjoy
There's
that?
no,
What are your thoughts
yeah,
on something like
yeah.
that?
No, that's a great one, because, you know, when you get into the genre like I have, and you're a writer in it, that means you're in there 2 feet. You're going to be
Yeah.
asked opinions about things. Well, it just happened that just before the pandemic, the Bram Stoker Festival in Dublin, and I
Hmm.
was there to give a lecture, and I found out that they were going to be debuting the trailer for the
Oh,
BBC
nice.
Netflix co-production,
Yeah.
and Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat and his wife were going to be there, and Clay Spang. And so I asked my friend who runs the whole thing, I said, guys, here's a favor. I got to get in the green room with these guys. I need to meet them. And they made that happen. And that was cool. And I asked them a couple of questions, because look, Erin, you and I know that in the Dracula world, there are very hardcore fanatic fans that are so
Yeah.
ticked off that nobody, as Christopher Lee says, nobody has filmed it like Bram Stoker has written it.
Yeah.
And that when the Coppola film came out in 92, some people hated it because it
Hmm.
was not exactly like the book. Some people loved it because it was a love story and incorporated some stuff from the book. Some people hated it because they had the gall to call it Bram Stoker's Dracula. So, that's
You get some harsh
obviously
opinionated people when you start talking about it.
very
Yeah.
volatile. So
Yeah.
I needed to get to these gentlemen and say, hey guys, I just got to ask you, before I even see your trailer, you know, is it resemble, my great granduncle's book? And they laughed and said, BBC's already done that. We did it in 1977 with Louis Jourdan. That was a pretty close adaptation.
Okay.
We're trying to bend the rules a bit. We're trying to expand. I said, that's cool. I recognize there are purists. I just want
Hmm.
good entertainment, and I want sort of like a good homage, to what Bram did. They said, I think you'll love it.
Yeah.
And honestly, it was cool. I was shocked with the third episode.
Hmm.
Not that I hated it. It was just shocking. I loved the first two episodes.
That was my
I think,
thought too. Yeah.
yeah. The only thing that irritated me, and I use the word irritate, Erin, not didn't like or hate, was Clay Spang. His persona as Dracula was, to me, about 90% good.
Hmm.
What bugged me and irritated me was almost every time before he was going to come in for a
Yeah.
bite or a kill, there was a quip. there had to be a little smart ass comment. And it was okay once or twice, that's okay. But
Yeah.
listen, I'm now being very critical because this means a lot to me. And I know that folks are going to ask me, but I thought they did a good job. And also, I really liked the Sherlock series that Moffat and Gatiss had done before with Cumberbatch. So I figured as much. You're going to get something similar with the quippiness, with Dracula, and they were right. And also that change at the end, the third episode. And I want you to say what you felt about it. But I thought, okay, it worked, but I also felt it was really rushed, and I kind of wanted it to go on maybe a fourth episode. So your turn. What did you think about that one? Because obviously that's the latest high-profile Dracula that's been out there for a while.
It is, and it's funny. I was actually talking to Sean Rourke about this. So you were on his show as well a while, I think it was a few years back. And he interviewed me the other week, and that was one of the questions. He was like, when you join his website mailing list, it said, what was your favorite Dracula? And that was just a little checkbox. And it got me thinking. I was like, oh my God, which one is it? And I started to think about it, and I was like, you know what? I think out of all of them, it would be the Netflix one. And what kind of got me, and I started thinking about it more, was and I know you talked about the quips, but I really enjoyed the character that he played, in the sense he was just arrogant, he was cocky, it was just his attitude.
Yeah.
And that's what really got me, was I loved that. And the fact that I felt like in the films, he got so much more screen time, and it kind of went into the character a hell of a lot more than other films have. Bram Stoker's Dracula, it was funny. I saw that in the theater when I was a kid, and I thought it was amazing because I liked vampires, and it was just great to see that in a theater.
Well, I'll tell you something about that, which is an interesting connection. I've got to know the screenwriter Jim Hart very well.
Okay.
And we've actually done presentations together at large Comic Cons where I get up for half an hour and talk about Bram Stoker writing the novel, his life and his research writing for 30 minutes, which is tough, by the way, to condense it in 30. And then he gets up and talks about how and why he took the story and turned it into a love story.
Yeah.
And we could talk for hours, but I'll just give you a 2-minute thing on it because I know your listeners probably know the movie, and they won 3 Academy Awards. But Jim felt at the time, and it's an interesting kind of look at in 1992 when it came out. We had in the 70s some good vampire films, The Salem's Lot and Interview and so on, but there was a lull, and and lots of other horror films. But what Jim felt was there needed to be a horror and romantic interest here. So what he did, which was really interesting, is much like Bram Stoker took existing folklore and superstition from Emily Gerard in Transylvanian superstitions, he took one that was out there about Vlad Dracula's wife, who committed suicide to stop being captured by the invading Turks.
Yeah.
And he took that piece of folklore and worked it around into his story so that Dracula, which Bram Stoker doesn't know, rebels against the cross because the wife commits suicide, which is a mortal sin, and cannot be buried by the priest. And Dracula rebels against the church, stabs the cross, drinks the blood, and converts into a vampire that way. Nothing to do with Bram Stoker's story, but it is believable for the plot that Jim Hart was trying to do. And also then he has the ability to search for the reincarnation of his wife because now he's supernatural. And that's one of the reasons, why he goes to London to search Mina Harker, because she has this, he's got this feeling it's the reincarnation of the wife. So that was interesting. And he just felt, that, look, he owned it. He realized some people didn't like it, but a heck of a lot of people did like it. And he joked at me and said, Dacre, the film, doesn't just get shown around Halloween. It gets a heck of a lot of viewers around Valentine's Day. This whole
that's interesting.
Love never dies. Which is interesting. Yeah.
This journey that you've been on and everything you've done, you've become an author as well, following the footsteps of Bram. You've written fiction and you've written nonfiction, and I know you've contributed forwards to so many books as well. But you took things a step further, continuing the Dracula legacy. Can you tell us about the books you've written, especially about Dracula, where you actually wrote the prequel to Dracula?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, this could go on for hours, but I'll
That's
try
okay.
to synopsis this.
Okay.
What I felt when, sort of analyzed Dracula and the notes and the typescript and reanalyzed the story and listened to what many scholars have said, and I said at the sort of the top of your show, it's like an onion, this incredible book. And the more you layer back, you learn more things. That I just felt that it would be pretty cool, first of all, to continue the story. And why is that? Well, there seems to be a no-brainer that nobody really knows why Bram Stoker ended the story with a Bowie knife going into the heart of the Count, rather than a stake. Was it a mistake? Was it something that he did on purpose because he wanted to do a sequel later? Was it in the heat of battle? There was no stakes lying around. Who knows? But that's something that I picked up on as like, okay, either this is an opening or something to exploit. And I thought, cool. And then I found in the typescript that there was actually a deleted ending, a changed ending, this volcanic eruption.
Oh.
I thought, okay, this is something that maybe Bram was thinking. But if he cut out the definitive ending, which would have been this massive volcanic eruption, maybe he didn't want Dracula to die after all. Otherwise, he would have had the stake and the volcanic eruptions. That would have been. So when I started doing that, I figured, okay, there needs to be more. And I think that one of the cool things I could do was incorporate Bram Stoker, his influence and his persona in these stories.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I found, I mean, I'm not the only guy finding these things, is guys like Hans de Roos finds them and Robert Besang finds them, and I become aware of them. The Icelandic edition, which is also now called the Swedish edition, because that was found to be published first, had a different preface to the story. Did Bram write it? We're not really sure. But it's got his initials at the end of it, and it's a longer preface, and it makes it sound like this bloody story was real. Obviously, it's not, but it's like Bram Stoker giving us, a real good think, as any theatrical manager would do, or a good storyteller. He gets you to believe what he wants you to believe. And he wants you to believe that this story was real. And so I decided to continue that and take the things that he used in the story to make us feel they're real, the real places, the real people, the timeline, and introduce Bram into his real story. And that's the basis for continuing it with Dracula the Undead with Ian Holt. And at the beginning that got massacred. The story did in a lot of the a lot of the reviews, because it was not written in the epistolary style, which quite frankly Ian and I were not strong enough writers to do that. I realized that was probably an error, but we just didn't have that capability. And so okay, then it's like, now I've got to build up another story, and it's like obvious to me that a couple more years of research, finding cool things, finding just the right writer so that we can write the epistolary style together. I find J.D. Barker, and this whole prequel, Bram's life, this troubled life that he had. And Erin, I found so many cool things that, what I say, have a lot of circumstantial evidence. They're not necessarily definitively true. We don't know for sure what caused Bram Stoker to be an ill boy for 7 years and bedridden and a possible invalid. But I think I know why. And I think he was probably bloodlet by one of his uncles, who was a famous bloodletter at the time. So all of that could have made Bram have sort of, traumatic sort of imaginations and so on. And I also think, like, how does a guy recover from this 7-year illness as a 7-year-old to become a champion athlete at the age of 16 and 17 at Trinity? And really, when I say champion, we've got, the family has trophies and all this stuff. So it's like, okay, in my sporting background, he would have been taking steroids or human growth hormone or blood doping. But no, maybe there was something supernatural. This is cool. So that gives me the idea to incorporate Bram into this early story, this prequel, that his recovery was brought on by some supernatural intervention. And he really
Okay.
did have a nanny. They really had a nanny who came to the Stoker's family and lived with them for life. And when I went into Trinity College archives, I really found that there was locks of her hair in an envelope that
Wow.
Thornley Stoker kept. I mean, some
Wow.
weird stuff like that. So it was like little pieces, Erin, of these puzzles that kind of came together that
Hmm.
would like, this is great plot. I just needed somebody like J.D. Barker to help put it all together.
Yeah.
So now we've got the prequel and we've got the sequel, but right in between all that, I find the lost journal in Bram's cousin's attic in the Isle of Wight. And that's where I get involved with Elizabeth Miller. And we have that transcribed, we write commentary on it, and we published that in 2012. And it's now actually republished as a paperback by Hellbound Press. So that's out again, which is cool, in a very affordable $15 range. So I got some incredible insight into Bram as a person, as a young man, which made it much easier to describe him and write him into the story as this young man while he's growing up, while he's in college, while he's working for Henry Irving, because of the journal that I found that really gives all this really cool insight.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the, what I'm doing and how I got there with these books. And as I said earlier, finding cool other cool stories that Bram wrote that have yet to make it into mainstream, which
Hmm.
was the Virgin's Embrace. We're working on, I'll tell you one we're working on right now, which is probably halfway through. And it's true. It's a
Ooh.
true story. It's the cholera epidemic story that Bram's mother lived through in
Oh,
1832.
okay.
And we know, I mean, there's certain things I told you earlier, speculation.
Hmm.
This is what we know, that Bram Stoker was told this story. And it's, reading it is about a 30-minute read, because I've
Hmm.
read it, out loud on tape, that he requested his mother write it down for him. So he has the story in writing, which it now sits in the
Oh,
Trinity College archives in type form.
yeah.
She wrote it for him when she went to France with Bram's two sisters to get trained in the arts. She sent it to Bram, and he used that story as the basis for a children's story called The Invisible Giant in the book Under the Sunset that Bram wrote, which is children's stories. So
That's cool. I
Chris and
didn't know
I,
that.
yeah, so Chris Macaulay and I have got an artist that we're using to create that cholera story into our third graphic novel, which
Oh,
will have the written story in its
yeah.
textual form. We'll have the graphic adaptation, which will have an introduction to Bram's mother
Hmm.
and all kinds of cool things about Sligo, the maps where all this stuff took place. So it's very similar approach to what I did with Dracula and Dracula. It's somewhat of a true story brought
Yeah.
to life, in writing, in graphic form, with maps, and make the stuff basically come alive.
Yeah. And it's cool too when you have also graphic novels or even just regular fiction. A lot of stuff, especially with people that we know, because I'm not a scholar, I admit that, but a lot of reading is more scholar material. And there's a
Yeah,
lot of things that, your average person who, is part of the audience won't go and pick up something like that. So if you go and get
it
something
could
that's
be a little
different,
dry. Yeah,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
and look, I respect, just as you, I respect all these guys that do great research,
Hmm.
but to get it to the masses,
Yeah,
which is my goal, there's enough scholars at the moment who have analyzed the heck out of Dracula and Bram Stoker, but let's get it to the masses to read some of his other stories and
yeah,
understand him. And that's one of the reasons I love going to libraries, universities, high schools, to give these 75-minute lectures about Bram's life, his process. And I do it in a sort of lighthearted way. Having been a school teacher, I can bore people if I need to, but I try not to, with cool film clips and things that Bram has influenced and he was influenced by in these lectures. So
yeah.
yeah, I agree with you. That's the whole idea. Let's lighten it up a little bit. Let's expand the universe of people that are interested in
Well,
Bram's
and
writing and his life.
And it's cool because when you reach some of these people, then some of them will actually dive into, the more academic work because they got
They may,
intrigued
yeah.
by what you have put out there. So
Yeah,
it's kind
I
of
may
like a
open
chain
the
reaction.
door. Yeah, I may open that door and it's theirs to go into, then
Yeah.
go read some of these great essays and other findings that DeRoos and other folks have done. Absolutely.
What do you have in store for fans this year? Is there like any special editions coming out? Do you have tours planned? Or I know everything's hard with COVID right now, but what do you guys plan for the year, hopefully?
Well, actually earlier today, I was just working on um, my personal top 25 things that you
Okay.
may not know about Bram Stoker and Dracula. Obviously, I could come up with 125 of them, but I'm actually holding that to a little bit later.
Okay.
You know those books, 100 places you need to go visit before you die, or 100
Yes.
things. So I'm thinking at 125 will be in the works, but what I'm doing is I'm publishing with Telos Publishing in the UK a Dracula edition.
Okay.
And I already put that one out a couple of years ago that had Dracula's guest
Mm-hmm.
attached to the front of it, because
Okay.
I know this is one of the things I know for sure, that it was once part of the Dracula typescript. I've seen
Yeah.
the proof, and I'll be, that the proof is in there. And then that alternate, or excuse me, deleted ending, the volcanic eruption, is in there. But I
Mm-hmm.
also thought that I would put a couple of other little bonus pieces in there, like 25 things you probably didn't know about Bram Stoker and Dracula, places where Bram Stoker wrote the story, people that inspired him, like his own brother and Buffalo Bill and Baroness Coots and people like that. Mark
Yeah.
Twain, Charles Darwin, all these things that have got into Dracula snuck in there one way or the other. So, and then I've got Lynn Hanson, who is a friend of mine in Chattanooga, Tennessee, who does great covers. We're working on like an iconic 125th anniversary cover for the book that
Yeah.
Telos will publish. And as you mentioned, COVID, my gosh, if travel permits, I'm
Mm-hmm.
working with a company called Experience Transylvania.
Yeah.
I've gone to Transylvania and I've done tours over there, but we're trying to do something different. This is a Swedish-based company run by two Transylvanian sisters. One has married a Swedish fellow and they live in Stockholm. The other
Okay.
still lives in Sibiu, which is in northern Romania and Transylvania. And we're going to run a trip. It's all organized. It's on their website, experience/Transylvania.
Yeah.
Um, and it is taking people to go to Whitby. And actually, we fly to Manchester, and
Okay.
then we take a bus to Hull, which is a
Mm-hmm.
really cool. It's got a great. Excuse me. No, we're going to York first. We're going to York to
York is
see
amazing. I love York.
it. Yeah, I'm glad.
Yeah.
Isn't it? It's very medieval looking. Going to go see
Yeah.
the dungeons. It's basically on the way to Whitby, and then we're going to spend 3 days in Whitby.
Yeah.
I got a friend, Dr. Crank, that actually does the tours there, and
Mm-hmm.
we're going to put on a commemorative dinner at the Whitby Jet Museum, where I give a talk
Okay.
about Bram. So quickly, so we do Whitby. We do some cool stuff, photo ops up at the St. Mary's Church and the
Yes.
199 Steps. British English Heritage is we're in touch with them. They want to do something when I'm over there, which is May 22nd, 23rd.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what yet, but we're thinking, yeah, we got to do cool big photo op up there of this group that's going to have a commemorative dinner.
Yeah.
And then we actually head to Edinburgh, where I give a lecture there, a literary lecture, which basically is a stopping off point to head up to Aberdeen and then Cruden Bay, which is
Mm-hmm.
sort of the middle of nowhere. But Erin, it's a special place. I've now been there twice, and I've written a chapter in a book about Slains Castle with my friend Mike Shepard. He's found things that none of the biographers have found out, and it's because he will just do the grunt work with microfilm and figure
Mm-hmm.
out all the references, the dates when Bram was there. So he now knows for sure Bram was there at least 12 times between
Oh.
1893 and 1911. And 1910, excuse me. He's found references in um, Harry Ludlam's book that Bram Stoker's son said Bram wrote the early chapters of Dracula in Cruden Bay. He probably wrote more of them. We also found that reference to him creating the abridged edition of Dracula while he was on summer holiday there. So we also know he wrote Mystery of the Sea, The Water's Mouth, and we also know that he wrote at least parts of Lair the White Worm while he was there. So obviously a very important place for Bram in his writing and his kind of get away from London mode. So that's where we will be for May 26th. We'll have a big commemorative dinner, and there's a plaque that I am donating. The Bram Stoker estate is to the Kilmarnock Arms Hotel, which is still there, obviously refurbished since Bram stayed there. And the big plaque will basically say, you know, Bram was here, this is what he did, and all the little spots where they knew that he used to sit when he did his writing, where he walked, some of the cottages he stayed in, and kind of, you really kind of bring it all together, Bram Stoker's time in Cruden Bay, much like he only spent one holiday in Whitby, but 12 of them in Cruden Bay, and yet Whitby has an incredible goth festival, but it's also got a ton of hotels and a lot more going on there than quiet little Cruden Bay. But what's cool about Cruden Bay is you go there now and not a lot has changed since Bram was there back up until 1910. So that's what hopefully is in the work, is that kind of tour. If it doesn't happen in May for pandemic reasons, we're just going to do it July or August. We'll get there someday as a tour, and share stories along the way. I'll be able to tell people a lot about what was sort of going on in Bram's life and read passages from some of the other books. I tell you this, there's a website called bramstoker.org that has free access to all the Bram Stoker stories because they're all public domain. And so I'll tell your listeners right now, go check it out, bramstoker.org, and go to the story, The Mystery of the Sea, which really to many people, and Mike Shepard and I agree, probably the second best story other than Dracula. It doesn't get a lot of mileage.
Okay.
Read the first two chapters. It is so autobiographical. It's so Bram Stoker. Here I am in Cruden Bay. This is what catches my attention, as his character Archibald does. But he has a encounter with something supernatural, which is a lady with second sight. And what's cool, Erin, is this plugs everything together. Bram Stoker was very interested in the occult, very interested in spiritualism, but the books that were in his library, one of them had to do with the Scottish Highlands and second sight. The letters that have been found in libraries deal with Bram talking to exchanging letters, 27 letters with known experts of the occult. So it's really cool what his interests show us when you dig, as we say, behind the scenes, and what comes out in his writing. So read those two chapters of Mystery of the Sea, and you'll get a rare glimpse of what Bram Stoker, sort of his thoughts on second sight and the occult.
What I think you should do, so I won't forget, is when you send me whatever links you want in the description below, let's put that in there, because I think a lot of people should actually check that out.
And it's a great site too. It's a great website. You want to see all of Bram Stoker's short stories free. It's great.
And talking back just to Whitby, because you were talking about that, and I went there a few years ago. I did my whole walking tour thing, walked where I went. Unfortunately, it was in December. The weather was horrible. It was freezing, but just the time when we were there for Christmas, that's the only time we could go. Can you tell most people, just because they may not know, what's the key significance to Whitby in Bram's novel? Just because as you said, it gets a lot more attention than, say, Cruden Bay. But Whitby seems to be, they have their goth weekends. And let us know what's significant then about that.
Well, I mean, you'll get it to it and see if you agree. He went there on one holiday at the beginning when he was starting to write Dracula. So it was 1890. It was a summer holiday. These are the short holidays he'd get from the Lyceum Theater. He took Florence and his young son, Noel. He went there a week ahead of them. But the amazing thing about Whitby is it is a beautiful seaside town that has an incredibly gorgeous ruin, which is an abbey that goes back to like 500. And it is now obviously it's a ruin, but it has this incredible sort of Gothic feel to it. And right next to it is St. Mary's Church. So he went there and got inspired to change the arrival of the Count that was going to be, this is from his notes now,
Yeah.
and Basang and I have had lots of chats about this. It was going to be Dover, but because he went on this holiday and got enamored with the atmosphere of Whitby, he also spent a lot of time chatting with the fellows from the Coast Guard, the rescue crew. Bram liked to get things just right and very accurate.
Yeah.
And so he spent time looking at the books in the Whitby Library, where he actually found a reference to Vlad Dracula. He spent time with Coast Guard Pethornek, who gave him information about the Dmitri, which was this Russian schooner that came in this bizarre storm under full sail and has made its way into the safe harbor of Collier's Hope. Bram took that, like he did many things, and tweaked them and used that as the ship arriving with Dracula being the Demeter, in the same way that the Dmitri came ashore. He had a black dog jumping off the Demeter in a similar fashion as the folklore in the region of the Bagash, the black dog that kind of horrifies people and scares people in the moors. So he had Dracula as a dog, not a wolf, and lots of interesting and strange things happening. But as you did, Erin, many people wander around the town, sort of recreating events in chapter 6, 7, and 8, and it's almost verbatim. It's Bram mentions he stayed in Mrs. Vesey's guest house on Royal Crescent. Well, sure enough, that's where Mina stays and Lucy in Royal Crescent. And they walk to Robin Hood's Bay and have lunch, and yes, you can do that. And they go through Mulgrave Woods, and yes, you can do that. And you cross the bridge and go up 199 steps. All these things are there exactly as Bram
which is amazing.
It is truly amazing. And it's cool to do it at night, because you get that vibe, just as they say, the Mina walk, where she went and tried to save or find Lucy, who was sleepwalking, and interrupted her encounter with the Count. So and to celebrate that, there are these Gothic festivals that people cosplay, dress up like crazy. There's music, there's bands, there's all kind of cool stuff going on. I've been there a number of times giving my lectures about, just as I've sort of said, the long version of Bram Stoker and Whitby and how it sort of caught his attention.
The one I wanted to ask you about was the Dracula scholar and vampire studies community recently lost some important people. So last year, Robert 18 Zang passed away, and very recently, Elizabeth Miller passed away. And just for people that don't know, I've got a couple different books here that, show. Robert actually autographed these for me, so they're very special. I'm very happy that I have these. And just I wanted to ask, because it's a community that's like so small when you start talking about the academic part, and losing some key players like this is just a huge thing. Where do you see the future of Dracula studies going? And have you come across like any upcoming scholars or fresh blood you anticipate will contribute to Bram Stoker's ever evolving kind of narrative with new research, new books, new everything that's coming out?
Good question. Really good question, because the loss of Robert and Elizabeth, they were so close friends and worked on the notes together and drafts of Dracula together. Robert and I had actually just finished an annotated Dracula.
He told me about that.
and we spent 2 years on this thing when he went into hospital and didn't come out. So part of my mission, for his wife is to get this book published, which I'm still working on. I've had a couple of rejections, but I've got a couple more that are out there. So it's guys like him and Elizabeth that did a lot of early groundbreaking stuff, along with people like Christopher Frayling and then all the biographers. But then, you've got, another sort of wave of people like Hans de Roos, Richard Berkhorn, the Swedish guy that found, the Swedish adaptation. John Edgar Browning has done great work. David Skoll. So The void will be filled as long as the interest is there. Um, and I think it's funny. You think, oh, what else are you going to find? If you found the journal, you found the notes, if you found the typescript, it's in Paul Allen's state. What else is there? There's plenty of other letters.
Yeah.
I don't put myself. I'm not a scholar either, but for instance, I got very lucky and found a letter in an auction written by Bram to a fellow that he was essentially asking for a job right after Henry Irving died.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Erin, that's a piece. And I say, we'll find more stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There are parts of Bram's life that we don't know too much about.
Yeah.
The writing of Dracula, still we don't know a lot about that as well. We know quite a lot, but not everything.
Yeah.
But then after Irving died and Bram went into sort of a decline, job wise, he didn't get a pension, he didn't get any inheritance from Irving, so he was kind of stuck. So I found a letter that helped me understand his mindset and what he was doing and who he was chatting with. So other folks will fill in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a cool torch that Bassang and Miller have started, and that is, make sure you get your sources right. Don't speculate too much. Don't just whip off and say this is for sure what Bram did. We've got to put enough circumstantial evidence together. So
mm-hmm.
I think it's healthy, and it's going to go on. It just takes dedicated people, who are not selfish, to give of their time,
Yes.
to make it happen and share the community, as you say. So I think it's in good shape.
And as someone that is just so accomplished in this field and everything that you've done to this point, whether it's writing, working on different presentations or lectures, and just everything that you've had a hand in at this point concerning Bram Stoker, what would you consider a project of yours that was like a labor of love, if you will? What are you most proud of that you've worked on?
I can't narrow it down to one. Really,
okay.
there's so many things. This is going to sound corny. The next project is always the most exciting one because you throw everything into it.
No, that's right. I like that. Yeah.
So I have got some positive feedback from a production company about this documentary. So that's kind of where I'm throwing more energy and giving more stuff to it.
Yeah.
Climbing the top of Mount Israel with my son and having an interesting time getting back down again. This was the location of Bram's fictional castle. Hopefully that'll be immortalized in because we do have film of it in a documentary film. So cool. Who knows, the next 5 years, certainly not next 125, I won't be around, but the next 5 should be interesting.
And my last question, just because you're so busy and you do so much, what do you do in your downtime when you have a moment and you just chill out? What do you do? Do you read? Do you watch movies? Do you do fish? I think you fish, don't you?
I'm an avid fly fisherman, and I try to carve out time to go do that.
Yeah.
I watch stuff like Yellowstone and Justified that have nothing to do with vampires.
Okay.
I just love to kick back because my wife, although she's a really good researcher, she doesn't like to watch the stuff and get scared. So we choose other stuff that we watch. I love the outdoors and hiking, mountain biking, and fly fishing whenever I get time to head up to the mountains or head out west and to your direction.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I had a great time. I learned a lot of stuff too, which was really fun. And for all our viewers at home, basically check out all the links we're going to put in the bottom here, because there's some good websites we talked about, some of Dacre's websites as well. So I want you guys to check out everything. And otherwise, that's all we have for you tonight. And thank you so much again for coming on.
Well, thank you. Great questions, great conversation, great time. Appreciate it, Erin.
Yeah, no problem. So everyone at home, stay safe and stay morbid. Bye for now.